Good evening and welcome everyone to this webinar. As Jo said, I'm Karen. I'm a resourcer at Ten2Two, and prior to this role, I worked for a large corporate organisation for 20 years in HR. So between Jo and I, we've seen many CVs and we've also seen many gaps in CVs. I too have a gap in my CV. I left my HR role and took a career break for 6 years to raise my son and also run my own small business. And I'm really proud of that gap. I'm proud of what I achieved during those 6 years, first and foremost being a mum. And it hasn't stopped me from returning to business and securing an HR related role here at Ten2Two. So I just wanted to reassure you that gaps in CVs are fine. Unexplainable gaps can sometimes lead to people missing out on great opportunities. So today on this webinar, we're going to talk about what types of gaps we see in CVs, why we see them, and why it's important to do something about them. I'm going to chat for about 25 minutes. And as Jo said, there'll be a Q&A session at the end. We do want to make this webinar interactive, so we will be running a polling question. All being well on the technology, we'll go for that and we'll see what happens. And so please join in with that polling question. And also, if you want to post questions as we go through the material, then please feel free to do that as well. And we will try and answer some of your questions as we go through if they're appropriate at that time. As Jo said, please don't feel you've got to take copious notes. This webinar material will be available to you at the end of the session. And just sit back, enjoy and listen and interact when you can. So what are we going to cover on our agenda today? We're going to talk about why we need to be aware of unexplainable gaps in CVs. We're going to talk about the reasons for unexplainable gaps in CVs, and some of those reasons are more obvious than others. So I'll share some insight with you and some examples of unexplainable gaps. And then we'll talk about how do we fix those unexplainable gaps. As I say, gaps are fine, but we need to explain them. And I'll give you some simple examples of how to do that. And also, one of the most common reasons for a gap in a CV is a career break. And some of you may well be in a career break at this point. So we thought it would be a great opportunity to spend some time on this evening's webinar talking about returning to work after a career break and some of the things to think about when you're about to return to work. And then we'll summarise and do the Q&A session. So, why do we need to be aware of unexplainable gaps in CVs? So what? Who cares? Does it matter? Well, yes, it does matter. Research and experience tells us there are 5 things recruiters notice first on your CV. And they are recent work experience, job hopping, gaps, brand names, and a list of skills. So as you can see there, gaps is right fairly near the top of that list at number 3. So as you know, your CV is your selling document. Your CV will secure you an interview. So it's really important that those gaps are explained on your CV. You want someone to pick up your CV, a recruiter or a hiring manager, read your CV and put you straight on that yes pile. If there are unexplainable gaps in CVs, then it might be that recruiter or hiring manager won't put you immediately on that pile. So, for example, if they're shortlisting 5 candidates for a role, the last 2 candidates they're looking at have the skills and experience. Both have those skills and experience they want. One's got unexplainable gaps and the other hasn't. Which candidate is more likely to get on that yes pile? So gaps do sow a seed of doubt, so it's important to do something about them. So I'm just going to now open up to the polling question. hand over to Joe, who's going to put the question up, and hopefully you'll be able to share with us. Here we go. Brilliant.
Hopefully, people, if our tech is working, you should have a poll in front of you. Now, we've made an assumption that you guys are here this evening because you probably have a gap on your CV. There is the option for no gap, and you just joined because you wanted to see our faces, of course. But yeah, I'm not expecting many people to vote for that one. It would be great for us to know what the gap on your CV is due to, and then obviously we can tailor our content. That's great. Those of you who are writing other, maybe you can just pop in the Q&A box what your other is. If you don't feel comfortable sharing, please note that this is anonymous. I should have started by saying that this is a completely anonymous poll. So not that there is any reason to be embarrassed for your answer, but in case anybody is, there's no need to be. Okay, so I think we've had everybody vote. That's fantastic. Nearly everybody. Wonderful. So I'm going to end the poll and share those results. And to be honest, they're not that different than we expected. So bear with me. So as you can see, hopefully, the majority of people on this evening's webinar have taken a career break due to raising a family. And that is typically the main reason for people to have gaps on their CV. And obviously, being who we are, it is one of the main areas that we see people have gaps on their CV. Other areas are searching for roles, caring for relatives. That is a growing area for people having gaps on their CV. With the aging population, we have more and more candidates coming to us who have taken a break because of caring for relatives. So Karen will go on to talk a little bit about each of these reasons. And if there is anything that we miss, then we can come back individually.
Okay, thanks, Jo. So yes, definitely career breaks, a common gap in CVs, and often sometimes not explained. So we will cover definitely career breaks and particularly raising a family. But there are another couple of gaps that might not be quite so obvious. And you might want to have a look at your CV after this session to see whether actually you do have these gaps in your CV. The first reason is quite simply errors. Sometimes we see people have put dates in for a role that they've undertaken, but have actually got the date wrong. So it's a simple thing. Check your CV, make sure you haven't got any errors in it. Avoid any unnecessary doubt. Avoid any unnecessary questions in an interview. The other thing we see sometimes is where people are saying they're currently in a role, but actually they finished that role a month or so earlier than it actually states. So the thing there is, often this is because people may well be unemployed, and they might be embarrassed to say they're unemployed or worried to say they're unemployed on their CV. It's really important not to be worried about putting unemployment on your CV. A job is not for life. We know that the stigma of unemployment has now gone with everything going on in the world in terms of, you know, the recession, the financial crisis that we had in 2008, Brexit. And with the recent pandemic, we are seeing more and more people with redundancy on their CVs now, and in some cases, more than one or two redundancies on their CV. So don't be afraid to put unemployment on your CV, and don't be embarrassed about it. You know, a job is not for life, as we said. Another reason that we find people have gaps in their CVs is aspiring to have a short CV. So yes, we want a short CV. We don't really want it to be any more than 2 pages. 1 or 2 pages is great. But if it means missing out chunks of your employment history or your education, then you know, don't miss those out. They still need to be on your CV. And if that employment was some years ago and a number of years ago, then just summarize those job roles that you did a number of years ago. And you can see an example of doing that in the box below. So just summarizing the types of roles that you had and perhaps the companies that you worked for. That will mean that you can have a short CV without any gaps. Another reason, which you might not be aware of, is where people exclude what they think are irrelevant roles. So they might be applying for a particular role and they feel that some of the roles in their CV aren't relevant. So they're not aligned to the role that they're applying for. And they take out those roles and there's a gap there. So it's really important not to take out roles. It's also important not to move roles that you think are more relevant to the role you're applying for to like the start of your employment history, because that makes it really difficult for a hiring manager or a recruiter to read the CV, because it takes it out of chronological order, makes it confusing and not really clear in terms of the career path that you've taken. So don't move roles around. And another thing we see often is where people have perhaps been doing lower level roles for a certain period of time in their career because it fits with their personal circumstances. And they take those lower level roles out for fear that they may be overlooked for a more senior role that they're applying for. Again, don't do that. Keep those roles in your CV. What we would advise in terms of how to handle that is to make sure that you use your personal profile to highlight why you're applying for certain roles. So if, for example, you've been doing lower level roles and you're now in a position to move into more of a senior role, then a statement in your personal profile saying something like, I've recently been doing administrative roles. I am now in a position to secure a more senior role where I can use my skills from the past in XYZ, is a really good thing to put in your personal profile to really get the reader to focus on those roles in your CV, even if they were in the past. So use your personal profile to draw the reader to the parts of your CV that you need them to focus on. And of course, you can also use your cover letter as well if you're applying for a role. The other thing that you can do is expand on relevant roles in your CV and then shorten and summarize achievements, perhaps in roles that you think aren't quite so relevant for the role you're applying for. So keep your CV complete, keep it in chronological order. And then we talked about one of the most common unexplainable gaps, as we've talked about, is career break. And this is mainly, we see raising a family. Obviously myself, I did the same thing. And obviously other caring responsibilities, as Jo said, we're seeing a growing number of this coming up. Maternity leave is often a gap, illness and unemployment, as I mentioned before. So be open and honest in your CV. As we always say, honesty is the best policy. So now we've talked about some of those unexplainable gaps. Let's talk about how we can actually explain them in a CV. And it's quite simple. All you need to do, for example, is provide the dates from and until, and a simple one-liner: career break to raise a family. Now, some people like to expand on that if they feel that they've picked up skills and experience during that period that are relevant to the role that they're applying for. So you might want to do a couple of sentences to expand on what you did within that break as well. And as you can see, here's a couple of examples where someone's used their project management and communication skills to complete a house extension, for example, whilst they took their career break. You may also find that you can use your skills that you've used in your past career whilst you're on a career break as well. So, for example, here, the treasurer of a school PTA using their finance skills. So it keeps those skills fresh and it will help to get you back into the workplace after a long career break. But the key thing to remember here is There is no need to expand on things, just being very clear around the dates it started and finished and why you have that gap in your CV. Another example here is the unemployed. So again, dates and a simple one-liner. Again, if you felt that you perhaps had a longer career break due to unemployment for a certain reason, for example, a number of people have struggled a little to find a role that they want during the pandemic, after the pandemic, and you can perhaps explain that in your CV with a sentence. Again, sometimes when people have a break due to unemployment, they reconsider and think about the career that they want to take going forward. And often we find that people may well take a professional course to help them secure that next role as part of their career. So again, it might be expanding on that in terms of what you've been doing. And again, in terms of if you have been unemployed for a little while, talk about what you've been doing to get yourself ready for your next role, improving your certain technical skills, or maybe providing voluntary work for a local business, for example. So this is just some of the things you can do to expand as to why what you've been doing during that gap. But it isn't essential. It's whether you wish to do that or not, and if it aligns with what you're trying to achieve going forward. And a couple of other ones just to explain here. Maternity leave, is important to say that you do not need to put in your CV your maternity leave period if it's part of your contractual period of employment. Some people do decide to extend their maternity leave and take a little bit longer before they return to a role, and may wish to put the reason for the gap as extended maternity leave rather than a career break. That really is up to you. That's fine either way. And then illness, it's just a case of the dates and a career break due to an extended period of illness, and there's no need to explain any further than that. So hopefully that gives you some examples of how to explain gaps in your CV. And obviously, if we haven't covered everything, then feel free to post a question in the Q&A box. And we'll try and cover that today or after the session. So maybe some of you are in a career break at this point in time and looking to return to work. So I'm just going to go through quickly with you some steps to consider if you are returning to work after a career break. So it's a great opportunity to really think about what you do want to do. What work do you find the most fulfilling, and what do you enjoy doing? Where do you want to work? What sector? What type of role do you want to do? Spend some quality time thinking about what you want to do next. Boost your confidence. So when you've been on a career break for a while, we do have a bit of a knock of our confidence, our professional self-confidence. So think about ways that in which you can build that confidence again in terms of going out there, perhaps working for a charity, using your previous skills for a charity on project work, securing a role locally with a business, providing free resource. That's always very welcome. It not only will boost your confidence being back in the workplace again, but it will also give you additional information to add to your CV and also build your network of contacts. Revise your technical skills, so things like Microsoft Office, what's the latest packages, how competent do you need to be with those packages, i.e. Excel, PowerPoint, Word, and think about whether you need to refresh those skills and upskill yourself. Update your professional qualifications and memberships. It may be that you need to finish a professional course. It might be that you could attend some seminars, workshops to get yourself back up to speed in that profession. Get in touch with ex-colleagues in the profession as well. And also you may need to renew lapsed memberships. Check your sector knowledge. So which sector do you want to go back into? What's the latest regulation, legislation, working practices? Find out information. Be ready when you go to interview with that information and that knowledge. Amend your CV, of course. Make sure, obviously, you haven't got any unexplainable gaps in your CV. And obviously, you can use the material that we've got here at Ten2Two to help you with creating a winning CV. And also, we've got material to help with interviewing tips as well. So check out that material and get yourself ready to make sure that when the reader reads your CV, you are on the top of that pile. Refresh your contacts through your network. So use LinkedIn, reconnect with old colleagues. Don't be afraid to connect with colleagues that you haven't perhaps spoken to for 10 years or so. Everyone is more than happy to help people when they get in contact. Don't be embarrassed about contacting people. Actually, they may well welcome you contacting them and will be very happy to help in any way that they can. And get help from professional recruiters, obviously, like ourselves. So just to summarise the call this evening, set yourself up for success. Don't have unexplainable gaps in your CV. Don't miss out on great opportunities. Get yourself in the best position to secure the role that you want to be in. Check your CV. Check for small errors. Don't let small errors stop you from being up on that pile, that CV pile, the top of the pile. And get friends and family to check your CV, read it over and give you feedback. Make the transition easier if you are returning to work. Return to work, think about what you want to do, and also get yourself in that best position to achieve that role. Oh, and seek help and support, obviously from colleagues, friends, from professional recruiters like ourselves, and obviously use the material that's available to you. Here at Ten2Two, we have lots of webinar material from this session today, but also previous webinars and blogs that are on our website. So check out the Ten2Two website. And I'm now going to open up for questions. So I'm going to hand back over to Jo, who's going to manage the Q&A for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. Hopefully everybody found that really, really useful. I too have a career break gap on my CV, again, for raising children. And until working for Ten2Two, it terrified me. I was terrified thinking that people would judge or lay expectation. We have had some fantastic questions through. So a number of you I've been messaging while Karen was delivering that. There's a few that I'd like to sort of open up and have a conversation with Karen about, because they're quite interesting questions and I'm sure that these people aren't alone. So one member of the webinar this evening has asked, does including the fact that you've raised a family explicitly on your CV open you up to discrimination, and which is worse, allowing yourself to be opened up to that, or having a gap in your CV? Now, my personal opinion is that if an employer was going to discriminate against you because you have a family, then you don't want to work for that employer. Obviously, you don't want to have to go through the process of that potential discrimination at all. We would love to think that it didn't happen. We're realistic. We know that unfortunately sometimes it does. I would strongly guide you towards explaining the gap in your CV above being worried about any discrimination. What do you think, Karen?
Absolutely. And so many people are consciously taking the decision now to take a career break and raise their family. And that's not just, I'm assuming this person is a woman, and maybe I shouldn't, but that's not just women taking career breaks, it's men as well, because, you know, family is important and there's a time during your career where it's a priority. So, and I think more and more people are seeing that as well. So yeah, don't be afraid to explain that on your CV.
Wonderful. Another excellent question, a couple that I'm going to kind of combined together because we might be running out of time a little bit. One, what period of time is considered a gap? Is there a minimum or any gap? Now, again, I think that this is one that is open to discussion and people are going to have different personal opinions on. Back in my HR day, I would scrutinise a CV and notice any gap at all. So whether it was as short as a month or two or as long as, 10 years, any gap at all would be identified and would cause me to question that CV. And as Karen said, that is the thing that we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid there being any question marks in the employer's mind when they're reading your CV. So my thought would be that any period of time is a gap. Karen?
Absolutely. Same. I agree, Jo. Yeah.
Excellent. The other question that's similar in a way, but kind of not. Do you consider working as a freelance a career gap? Absolutely not. Anything that you are engaged in that means you are gainfully employed or receiving payment through services rendered isn't a career gap. So even if you are freelancing for a day a week or a few hours a week, you are still actively engaged in your profession, whatever that profession is at that time in your career. So I don't see that as a career gap. You may want to be explicitly honest on your CV and say that you freelanced to allow you the flexibility to raise your family or something, if that is the case. But I don't see it as a gap. Karen, your thoughts?
No, I agree. Freelance, I guess it depends on how much time you spent in that role, but and how you want to explain it in your CV. But if you are working, freelancing, consulting, whatever that might be, it is part of your career, and it's a choice that you've made as part of your career.
Absolutely. We have got some gentlemen who are letting us know that there are men on the call as well. Good for you.
Excellent.
So what other wonderful questions? You've got so many questions here. Thank you so much, everybody. Somebody can't get access to their LinkedIn account. Unfortunately, I can't help with that.
Not based on our technical issues.
Oh, yes. Technical is not our middle name at the moment. So being a stay-at-home parent for a period of time, hopefully it's not holding you back is the answer. As we've said, a gap on your CV only holds you back if it's unexplained, because it raises question marks, and unfortunately, due to the volume of candidates that most people see, they're unlikely to pick up the phone and get answers to every single question mark that there is, and you'll just go straight on that no pile. There's quite a few questions here about ageism. I do have to note that we aren't, Karen and I have both got HR in our background, but professionally right now we're not HR consultants. So we're not able to comment on specific areas of legislation. However, again, with the question about whether to put a family or not on your CV, if you feel as though an employer is treating you differently due to your age, then do you want to work for that employer? This is a two-way conversation. It is a two-way agreement between you and them. You need to be comfortable working for the person that you're applying to work for. Karen, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
It's difficult. I haven't actually looked at the specific questions. It might be one that we need to come back to, and if we can kind of provide any answer to that or any guidance, I think that's probably the best way forward with those questions, if I'm honest.
Excellent. We've got a webinar member here who has asked, what would you suggest for a mid-level manager who has taken a break for education and is now returning to work? During education, I did work part-time for some time. Do you think hiring managers will not consider somebody who's gone back to education at a later stage in their career? Again, if they can't see the value in what you've chosen to do, then maybe they're not the employer for you. I personally think that anybody who takes the choice to return to education should be given an award, because it's very difficult to make that choice once you've stepped into the working world, to kind of step back out and invest in yourself in that way. So well done, first of all. Well done as well for working part-time during that period, because that is a juggle. And I think be proud of it. Make sure it's up there chronologically on your CV. Make sure that you are explaining your reasons, and be proud of the fact that you have taken that time to better yourself. And I'm sure that employers won't see it as a negative. I'm sure that they'll see the value that you're able to bring them through you making that decision. We've got lots of people asking if we can send links to various hints and tips. We will be sending an email with some links for you all in the next couple of days. However, if you do go to the website, you can navigate through to a candidate section, and that will contain all of our blogs, past webinars, and guidance sheets, covering topics all the way from CV writing, interview skills, how to deal with your first 90 days in a new job. And we are working on some specific returner content at the moment, which I know that a lot of you are going to be very interested in. So please do navigate through the website. And if there is something specific you're looking for, you can pick up the phone or email one of us and we'll be glad to send it across. Sorry, Karen.
No, I meant to mention that obviously we're developing that further piece where I took you through the steps to consider when returning to work after a career break. We are developing that content for a webinar, so watch this space in terms of in the new year, probably.
With hopefully not so many technical glitches along the way. Well, we've about come to the end of our time now, so I just have time left to thank you all so very, very much for joining us this evening. Hopefully you found this evening's content useful. On the screen now are some contact details for Karen and myself. You can call anyone at the 10-2 office and we'll all be delighted to help in any way that we can. You will be receiving some information from us over the next couple of days, referring back to this. We would really, really appreciate any reviews that you can give us on Facebook or Google, and there will be links in the email. Another one of our technical troubles was trying to see if we could share that link with you this evening, but we weren't able to figure it out. So that will come through to you in the next few days, and we'd really, really appreciate it if you were able to give us some reviews. There's lots of little smiley laughing coming up.
It's making me smile.
We're all sitting there giggling at us because we're so technically rubbish. Thank you ever so much, everybody, for giving us your time this evening. Please go and relax, have a cup of tea, glass of wine, whatever takes your fancy. And remember, those gaps are only a problem if they are unexplained.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone.